Okay, so welcome to part two of our week's lesson on the Holocaust. Um, just as a quick review of where we've been, on Tuesday's class, we looked at how the rights of Jews and other, quote, non desirables, people that the Nazis considered people that they didn't want in their society, were taken away by the Nazis in Germany. We saw how violence against the Jews began, especially in Kristallnacht. You may remember there was a 17-year-old who was upset that his dad was deported, shot a German, a Nazi in Paris, and that was used by the Nazi party to start this wave of violence against the Jews. That's called Kristallnacht. And then number three, we saw how some Jews even tried to escape Nazi Germany after this night, after Kristallnacht. And they became refugees, but we also saw how a lot of the world's uh, nations basically said no to these Jewish refugees. We saw how many of these Jewish refugees who were turned back by countries, yes, including the United States and many others, were basically turned back to Germany, um, who then found themselves unable to leave. And we saw how Hitler decided, and the Nazi leadership decided, that they were going to force all the Jews to live in segregated ghettos in the cities that the Nazis controlled in Europe. Today, we are going to see what happens after all these steps take place, after the Holocaust could have been stopped at any one of these points. And we're going to see what happens after Hitler and the Nazis have basically lost their patience with what's been happening up until this point. As I mentioned, this is the start. This is really the start of the Holocaust. When you think of the images of the Holocaust, when you think of the movies that you saw in middle school about the Holocaust, this is what is happening, right? This is where that lesson is. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to describe what Hitler's, quote, final solution was. And that includes how the killing started, and then what the final stage was. Because this is a big misconception that I see from students, is they think that Hitler came to power, brainwashed all the Germans to hating the Jews, and then the Holocaust happened, and it all happened at once. And that's just not the case, right? Like in the last class, what you saw is this is something that took place over a decade. The hatred of other people inside Europe isn't something new. The hatred of other people outside of your ethnic or national group, any part of the world, isn't new. Hitler is just using that. This is what happened after nobody stopped him, after nobody stood up, and after the world turned their backs on these oppressed peoples in the world. So let's see what happens when good people can't do enough, when good people choose to do nothing, and be what a survivor of the Holocaust called bystanders. The final solution. So the first part of our class, what is this thing called the final solution? What's the problem, right? January 20th, 1942, right in the middle of World War II. Hitler's basically lost. He's not able to take over Britain, right? If you remember, this is a month after the Japanese attack the United States in Pearl Harbor, and the United States declares war on the Japanese, Italians, and Germans. This is all happening within a month of Pearl Harbor. At this conference, about a month after Pearl Harbor, leaders of the Nazi Party gathered in the suburb of Berlin. Berlin is the capital of Germany. A suburb is like a neighborhood, right? This is a very prestigious, a very fancy, elite neighborhood called Wannsee. And at Wannsee, there's a conference where the Nazi leadership gather to coordinate, to plan what they consider to be the solution to what they're calling the question of the Jews. What do we do with the Jews and other quote, undesirable people in Germany? And the answer was this. It was the systematic killing, or the genocide of the Jews, along with other people that the Nazis considered undesirable. Now, a genocide, remember, it's not just This isn't just going out and killing one or two or three or a dozen or 100 people. No, this is more than that. This isn't the killing of 100 or 1,000 people. This is an attempt to erase an entire group of people from existence. And yes, the Jews are absolutely the largest single group that were targeted by the Nazis. And I think attracted a special disdain from the Nazis. But there are other groups, right? Other groups that the Nazis considered undesirable, people that they wanted to get rid of, would have been people who were disabled, physically and mentally disabled. Homosexuals were explicitly called out at the Wannsee Conference. Russians, Poles, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses. And this is a very long list. At the end of this lesson, you're going to see kind of what the final count was. And the list is going to surprise you. There were more people killed in the Holocaust who were not Jewish than who were Jewish. So just keep that in mind when I'm talking about the Jews. And again, they are the real focus of the Holocaust. Just keep in mind that that could also apply to these other groups that the Nazis have targeted. Now, the Nazi leadership have this vision that 11 million Jews by the end of this would be, quote, eradicated. By that, they mean murdered, killed, wiped from existence. And this included not only the Jews in Nazi-controlled territories, but would also include Jews in Britain, in territories that they hoped to conquer, and in even neutral territories, territories that for whatever reason decided that they didn't want to pick sides in World War II. Switzerland, for example, famously didn't pick a side in World War II. The Nazis had a plan for forcing Switzerland to give up its Jews, and they probably would have if they had been given enough time. So the final solution, to go into more detail, this is the plan that they come up with. Here's how they decide to murder millions of people. As I mentioned, the ultimate goal is to physically destroy all of Jewry, to kill all the Jews from Europe, to wipe them out of existence. The Jews from Nazi-controlled territories would be rounded up. And remember, they're in different parts of Europe. They're in different cities. They're in different ghettos. Some are even still in the countryside. They're going to be rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Concentration means they're being focused. Concentrate means to focus all your attention in one place. So they're going to focus all the Jews into these certain camps. In these camps, the Jews would be divided by gender, men one way, women another way, and those who are able-bodied, those who could work, would be forced to do slave labor, basically, for the Nazis. The non-able-bodied, those considered to be too weak, would be killed immediately. The harsh conditions of the camps would kill most. But the question remained, what will happen to those who survived even the slave labor camps? Here's a quote from the Wannsee Conference, one of the attendees. Any final remnant that survives the slave labor camps will doubtless consist of the elements most capable of resistance. So even after we do all this, even after we put them in slave labor and kill half of the Jewish population, those who survive are going to be the strong ones. Those are the ones we should be really worried about. They must be dealt with appropriately, since representing the fruit of natural selection, they are to be regarded as the core of a new Jewish revival. So there's a special fear that the Nazis have for even the people who survive, for the people who even survive the slave labor camps. We will see what their solution is in the third part of today's lesson. But before we do that, we're about 5 minutes in. I want to make sure that you're following along. Here's our first check for understanding. Our usual 3 true or false questions. 1, the conference where Nazi leaders discussed the final solution was called the Wannsee Conference. Number 2, the plan included the systematic murder of the Jews, a process known as genocide. And number 3, the murder of Jews and other peoples labeled by the Nazis as undesirable included slave labor camps where people would be essentially worked to death. All right, so let's move on to part 2. Let's see how the killings begin. Phase 1 of this final solution. Something you should know. Maybe you've seen this in movies. I know they're featured in a lot of movies and a lot of video games. There's a special group of Nazi soldiers called the Schutzstaffel. Basically means stormtroopers, more famously known as the SS. These are the most deplorable of the Nazis. These are the guys who are the true believers of Nazism. And they were considered to be an elite force. They were considered to be Hitler's personal guard, the guys that were eager to do the dirty work that Hitler and the Nazis wanted. The SS formed killing squads, Eichengruppen, which rounded up and hunted down Jews from Nazi-controlled territories. In some cases, the SS, even before sending these Jews to the concentration camps, would execute the Jews that they captured, which is why they earned the name of being killing squads. This is an extremely famous photo. This was, this is something that when people see this really captures the brutality of the Nazis and the SS. These are Jews who have dug their own grave. They were ordered to dig pits. They didn't know what they were doing. I'm sure some of them knew, but they weren't explicitly told by the SS that they were digging their own graves. And once they were finished digging these pits, they were shot. And this happened multiple times across the countryside. Note, however, that the main goal of the SS is to round up as many Jews as they can to send them into these concentration camps. Now, about this time of the school year, we would start watching a few movies, kind of as a reward of doing a good job. There's a very famous movie, one that I would show called Schindler's List, which shows the SS doing some of this rounding up. So here's a very famous scene from that movie. The scene is often referred to as the girl in the red coat. If you're sensitive, if you don't want to see, it's a very good movie. It's a very good dramatization. But because of that, if you don't want to see it, feel free to skip ahead. Some of you might be interested, though. Let's maximize the screen. All right, that's enough for that scene. But in the scene, you see the SS going around, rounding up the Jews from the ghettos where they had been concentrated, and even killing some who they thought would provide resistance to the SS or who they may just have had a personal dislike of. the movie is focused on this guy. The actor is Liam Neeson. He's playing a guy named Oscar Schindler, who we're going to see more about in part 3 of today's lesson. So just keep in mind, we'll revisit another scene from this movie in just a few moments. It is rated R, so if you wanted to watch the full movie, check in with your parents first. But it is otherwise a very, I think, conventional, but effective movie. I think worth watching. So what happens after they are? Let me actually fix the screen here. So what happens after the Jews are rounded up by the SS? Well, according to the plan of the Wannsee Conference, the Jews were to be taken to these, quotes, concentration camps. I think a better word for them is slave labor camps, because that is what they are doing. Those Jews not killed by the killing squads, and those considered able-bodied, those healthy enough to work, were essentially condemned to do slave labor, to be worked to death. They are producing goods, yes, for the Nazi party. Yes, they're producing ammunition. Yes, they're producing guns, but they're also producing goods for businesses, right? Like, businesses in Nazi Germany supported the Nazi party because they were getting free labor from these slave camps. In fact, the guy that we saw in that clip just now, Oscar Schindler, the guy on the horse, even profited from Jewish labor during the Holocaust. Hitler hoped that the harsh conditions of the slave labor camps would kill most of the Jews. In addition to just the harsh working conditions, SS guards severely beat or killed workers who were not productive enough. Let's take a look at another clip from this movie, Schindler's List, where we see kind of this first phase, these slave labor camps, where we see one of Oscar Schindler's employees actually being called out by the SS and being accused of not being productive enough. And again, movie is violent. If you don't want to see it, feel free to skip ahead about 3 minutes and you won't miss any of the content. But again, I think it is a movie worth watching. So enough of me, here's the clip.
What are you making? Hinges, sir. I've got some workers coming in tomorrow. Where the hell are they from again? Yugoslavia, Commandant. I've got to make room. Make me a hinge. Yes, sir. You're doing well. Oh, that's very good. But I'm a bit confused, and perhaps you can help me. What I don't understand is that you've been working since, I think, what, about 6 this morning. Yet, such a small pile of hinges. Oh, Christ. Check the angle lever, maybe it's bent.
When you click it, was the angle lever, that's the pin.
Maybe it's the pin. Maybe the pin shaft. Come on.
What did I just say? Yeah.
Herr Commandant, I beg to report that my heap of hinges was so unsatisfactory because the machines were being recalibrated this morning. I was put on to shoveling coal.
So, in that clip, you see, again, the forced labor, and it's not necessarily to even make weapons. Like it's German businesses that are supporting this, right? Like there are people who were, they may not have been the SS, but they were going along with it because it was good for their business. They were getting free labor. That guy, the Jewish man in that movie, was making hinges, for a door. And you also see some of the brutality of the SS in these labor camps. So again, we're about 2/3 of the way. Let's do our second check for understanding. True and false, the SS formed killing squads to find and round up Jews, sometimes killing them before even going to the concentration camps. Then 5, within those concentration camps, people were forced into slave labor and treated harshly by SS guards. All right, as you finish up, check for understanding 2. Let me make sure I'm back in full screen here. And let's move on to the final stage. Even this pace, with the slave labor camps, wasn't fast enough for Hitler and his Nazi followers. I think it's the polite word I want to use. The death camps were the next step. Deep within Nazi-controlled parts of Eastern Europe, these death camps were created. Now, I think that's interesting because that tells me that the Nazis knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew what they were doing was vile and evil. So much so that they're trying to hide these death camps. These death camps aren't along the shore. They're not even in parts of Germany which are heavily populated. They're not even in Germany in a lot of cases. They are deep within Poland or other Eastern European countries where they would be too far away from non-Germans to see, right? Because during World War II, there's planes flying around everywhere and bomber squads going around everywhere. These are so deep. The British airplanes couldn't get there. American airplanes couldn't fly over these and see that. They're hiding this. They know what they're doing is evil. When they get to these death camps, the Jews, again, separated by gender, and they were paraded, forced to march in front of Nazi doctors, who, again, separated, who they thought were allegedly the strong, mostly men, from the weak, mostly women, children, and the elderly. Those considered to be too weak to work were lied to and told that they were going to be showered. They weren't dressed. They put their shoes or luggage carefully away, right, thinking that they were going to get a shower. And instead, they were sent into gas chambers. And what came out of the shower heads was not water, but cyanide gas. This is one of the most chilling pictures, I think, from World War II, because these are women, children, and the elderly getting off the train at Auschwitz, one of the death camps, the largest death camp, excuse me. And you know that the majority of these people in this picture would be considered weak by the German doctors. And the majority of the people in this picture would be killed within minutes after the photo being taken. By the war's end, according to the Museum of the Holocaust in Washington, D.C., by the war's end, 6 million Jews are killed. So 2/3 of the Jewish population in Europe is killed. Whereas another 11 million other people considered undesirable by the Nazis would have been killed in the Holocaust. The killing is so thorough, the Nazis are so brutal, that in some countries like Poland and other Eastern European countries, nearly 9 in 10 Jews were killed. There are even some countries, I believe Estonia is one, where all the Jews were effectively wiped out. There were no Jews in some parts of Europe after the Holocaust. Had the war continued, or if the Nazis had won, there were definitely plans to keep killing even more Jews and even more, quote, undesirable people. The Russians, for example, were of special, or received a special hate from the Nazis. They considered Russians or Slavs to be inferior. And that brings us to this chart, right? I think it's hidden away by my camera here, but the number of Jews, as we've mentioned, is 6 million. Soviet civilians, Russians, excluding the 1.3 million Jews who were killed from Russia, 5.7 million Russians are killed in the Holocaust. And this doesn't even include soldiers. Whether or not we should consider soldiers to be a part of the Holocaust, these are Soviet prisoners of war, these were soldiers who were captured, is not a debate for us, but this is definitely what's included. This is what's described by the Holocaust Museum. The Poles, people in Poland lost 1.8 to 3 million people. The disabled, 270,000 disabled peoples were killed, or people with disabilities were killed. Freemasons, Slovaks, homosexuals, Spanish Republicans, people who fought against the fascists in Spain. You had another 3,000 killed from there. Now, some of you are also wondering, why are the numbers on the spectrum? Why isn't it like a clear, concrete number? Why isn't it exactly 3.3 million? Why is it anywhere between 2.8 to 3.3 million? And it goes back to that idea, there's this fact that the Nazis knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew what they were doing was evil, and they were hiding what they were doing. So we actually have very imperfect records about the Holocaust. And a lot of this has to come from evidence that came out after the Holocaust, new evidence that arises as historians investigate, as old Nazis begin to die off. More comes to light. I also don't want to end on this bad note, right? Because there is some light in the Holocaust. There are moments of resistance. There are moments where there is a fight back against the Nazis. There are a few Jewish revolts in the death camps. You can read about these two here, but the big one I want to talk about is in Auschwitz. In 1945, in January, these two women, Ella Gartner and Rosa Robata, helped organize a Jewish revolt. I look at them like this. The history isn't something that's made up. It's not like a fiction story. Like, these are people who look like they could have been my friends in college. These two women, like, this is taken before the Holocaust. These don't look like victims of anything. These are people. These are real human beings who still have this fire. In January of 1945, they organize this resistance. They kill a number of guards. I think something like 300 guards are killed. Ella Gartner and Rosa Robata, I think, are heroes. They are executed by the Nazis, though, and 1 month later, Auschwitz was ultimately liberated. There were also non-Jews who were upstanders, who tried to stand up, or at least hide the Jews. You guys, a lot of you know about the Diary of Anne Frank, or Anne Frank, as it's pronounced in American English. I think you read it in 8th grade or 7th grade. And then the movie we were just watching, Schindler's List, is about a guy named Oskar Schindler, who saved something like 1,000 Jews by forging documents and bribing Nazi officials into letting some 1,000 Jews survive by working for him. Now, Oskar Schindler's legacy is a complicated one. Oskar Schindler was actually a member of the Nazi Party. He was a womanizer, a drinker, a gambler, and all these things, but he is ultimately a very good man, right? Like, he does save, yes, thousands of Jews, but then think of the families that those Jews went to go on and have after World War II. And then those children of these survivors went and had grandchildren, and then their great-grandchildren. This is a genre of photo which is very popular. Not very popular, but I've seen it a few times, where the survivors, the people who were saved by Oskar Schindler, or other people like him, like to take photos of themselves along with all their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to show the impact of how just one person, how just one life saved in reality can save hundreds, if not thousands, of future lives. Oskar Schindler, also as a note, is the only member of the Nazi Party, or former member of the Nazi Party, who is buried in Jerusalem. And if you ever get the chance to see his grave, maybe I'll pull up a picture or something and post it on Google Classroom later. But his grave is still visited and well respected by a lot of the survivors because of the risks that he personally took and the lives that he does save. Okay, but that's enough for me. We're getting close to that half-hour mark. As per usual, that is the end of our video lecture. There is a chapter reading where we go into more detail on the final solution phase of the Holocaust, along with the exit ticket that is embedded. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. And of course, office hours are on Tuesdays and Fridays from 3:15 to 4, and Wednesdays at 2. If I don't hear back, if I don't see you guys in office hours, please make sure that you guys are taking care, staying healthy, and hopefully we will be able to reconvene and see each other again once all this finishes up. But until then, again, take care, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see each other soon.